Hi everyone. Today I would like to talk about monitoring and logging in cloud. And this is especially relevant for applications that run in production, because without monitoring, you would not be able to understand whether your application works efficiently and whether all the functionalities are working well. And without logging, if anything happens, you won't be able to understand what is the root cause and what is exactly happening, what goes wrong. Let's start with the first part, which is application level logging. In cloud, we have usually applications that consist of many microservices, and each microservice produces logs, obviously. But it would be inefficient to go to each pod and verify logs. Instead, we would like to have a central place where logs get stored. And the central place should be probably a database which is efficient for storing textual data and for searching for it, for filtering it, and etc. And such database can be, for example, Elasticsearch or similar DB. In general, when talking about application login setup, we often talk about ELK, which is an example of tools, Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, Filebeat, and these tools are often used to set up application login. Of course, there are alternatives, but in general, the setup is quite similar always. And if we talk about Elasticsearch, this is a place where logs get stored, and then on top, we can have a tool to have nice UI or to be able to set up visualization, searches, filtering on top of it. But obviously, when we have microservices, we do not want to put logs directly from microservices to a DB, because then we would have a shared database and for all the microservices, and it's definitely anti-pattern. So instead, we have a log processing agent in between, which is, in our example, Logstash. Logstash would get the logs from applications, and then it will push it to a database. And decoupling is not the only purpose of Logstash, because Logstash can do also processing of logs, and it can store it not only to Elasticsearch, but to other places. For example, if you need for audit purposes to store these logs for a longer time, you could also put them to object store and hide them there. So this is what Logstash can do. And also there is another component which is as a collector of logs, which is, for example, Filebeat, and it runs on the level of each service, and it collects the log from the service. So service does not even need to know directly about Logstash or any other log processing engine. Instead, service would just store logs the way it's used to, just pushing them to console or maybe storing them into a file, and log collector will pick these logs and send it to a log processing engine. So that's it about application logging part, but it's not enough because yes, we have logs for application. We can gain a lot of information out of there, but we cannot, for example, estimate what is the performance, what is the throughput of application, and what is the time to call that's needed to call DBs, or what's time taken for inter-service communications. So there is another set of tools for it, which is named application performance monitoring tools. And these tools would provide you information about inter-service communication, about communication to different data sources, including your databases, object stores, or any other. Additionally, they usually provide you information about stack traces, the error rate in your applications, and you can set also alerting on top of that. And now we have talked about application level monitoring and logging, but it's not enough because you also have infrastructure part, and cloud infrastructure can be very diverse because in cloud you can have not only servers, but you also can have managed services, and there can be databases run by managed services or other kind of storages. and even servers. You also need to monitor them on the level of, for example, instances. For this, we have infrastructure monitoring, and often cloud providers, they give you this out of the box. For example, in AWS, we have CloudWatch metrics that have most of information about your infrastructure, how well it runs, about CPU consumption, about memory consumption. But again, you need to keep an eye on it, and you need to know what metrics you require, because sometimes this basic default setup, it would not provide you some metrics that you might require. Like, for example, EC2 metrics by default, they do not have memory consumption. So you need to set up it extra. Or sometimes you need higher granularity and you need to, for example, enable enhanced performance monitoring or anything like this. Besides just having metrics or related to your infrastructure, there is also another aspect, which is compliance and security. And in production applications, usually it's a very important aspect that you also need to keep an eye on. And the compliance and security would require from you to have audit level and access level logging. And in cloud providers usually do it also. In AWS, you have CloudTrail logs enabled by default, but often they also require extra setup, because if you, for example, need to store these logs for a long period of time, or some logs do not come as a part of default CloudTrail setup, then you need to set up to do extra setup for it. Additionally, you might think that you run something on top of cloud provider like Kubernetes. And for Kubernetes, you also have audit logging, because you also want to know who, when is accessing your Kubernetes and what is doing inside of it. And this is the main purpose of audit logs in general, whether it's CloudTrail logs or Kubernetes audit logs. So this is the critical information to be known for future audits and for compliance and security purposes. So now we have application level logging and metrics, and also infrastructure level. And one another very important aspect is alerting. Because just having monitors, yes, it's very important, but but you do not watch these monitors all the time. You do not watch your metrics all the time, and if something starts happening, you would probably not notice it immediately, or especially if it's happening in the night time. And to cope with this, you should have 24/7 alerting setup, and someone should be always available to respond to this alert, especially if you have 24/7 running environments. And that's why the alerting is so important. And there are many options for alerts. First of all, alerting of application levels and can be set up in the UI tools that you use for application level monitoring, or for in logging tools. Often there are also capabilities for setting up alerts. But you also can set up alerts on level of your cloud provider, like, for example, CloudWatch alerts. They allow quite wide setup of alert in place, whether it's for infrastructure or even it can go beyond the infrastructure level alerting. So that's it for today. I have talked about monitoring and logging setup for cloud applications running in production. Thanks for listening, and bye-bye.